I am so happy to share this clarification for where ultra-processed foods, as defined by the NOVA scoring system, which I have said for quite a while, and not just me, has major flaws, does not look at nutrition and energy density, essentially only looks at the length of the list of ingredients on a food, and otherwise does not look at particular important factors as the final result of that processing. And obviously processing can go in one direction or another. We have seen highly processed food products such as medical formula meal replacements that have helped people substantially resolve metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, even full-blown type 2 diabetes in the context of a full therapeutic lifestyle intervention, of course, but still those products in and of themselves being ultra processed meal replacement medical formula shakes, for instance, that are often used after bariatric surgery to prevent muscle loss. We've seen in the University of Wisconsin trial of monkeys that was looking at longevity based on calorie reduction, that both groups were fed highly processed chow that was obviously supplemented with micronutrients, but essentially just cut the calories while the quality was still what would be defined as ultra processed chow and had extensive improvement in disease reduction and life extension. Now, to me, before we get into this amazing presentation by Dr. Kevin Hall, a what I call nutrition physicist at the NIH who runs metabolic ward trials, I will say that, and who's going to present us amazing control data of people living in basically hermetically sealed rooms for a month at the NIH, fed with such precision every single piece of food weighed to a quarter of a gram, how much they ate, how much they didn't eat. And I'll let him make further comments, and I'll stop the video as we go through as he's presenting at the Imperial College. I will say that I believe that a plant predominant flexitarian approach that's ethnic agnostic is best for most people. And I'm also open-minded to personalization. Some people, a form of keto might work, whether short term, probably, and maybe even long term. And we can look at aspects of that are related to results: blood pressure, insulin sensitivity, inflammation, lipids. Looking at cardiovascular imaging to see if there's any asymptomatic damage that's going on, in light of the fact that in 1/3 of cases, the first sign of coronary artery disease is sudden death, etc. But let's go ahead and get into this video. And I think the primary issue I have is that we don't define what people are now calling more and more ultra processed foods well at all with what has been billed as defining ultra processed foods. We need to look more at refinement of foods, not just processing and steps of processing and the length of the ingredients, but what's the ultimate result on average. There's maybe a trend towards higher risk when you are ultra processed, but we have seen clearly, and there are many examples you'll even see here in the video that I think are mentioned. But, for instance, Fruit Loops and Raisin Bran are scored the same. Okay, you might think that cereals are junk and so on, et cetera. But I'm here as a past president of the National Board of Physician Nutrition Specialists, and I could just not accept that Fruit Loops, which has virtually no fiber, which has a high sodium to potassium ratio, as opposed to Raisin Bran, still significant naturally occurring fiber and high potassium to sodium ratio, et cetera, are the same. They're not the same. That being said, let's get into this video. I'm going to start sharing Dr. Kevin Hall's presentation at the Imperial College, and we can take it from there. Okay, share sound, all righty. And we'll optimize for video sharing. And let's go ahead and get into it.
And we basically study them in this very artificial environment, but the ability that we have is to control that environment in really robust ways so that people don't have access to outside study foods. We are able to measure to the gram how many calories and how much carbs, fat, protein, sugar, all these sorts of things that people are eating. And that's the way I like to think of our studies, is that we basically are experimentally mimicking large shifts in the food environments that our subjects are experiencing. And the same people experience multiple food environments, and we measure their behavior. And we're told, they get told very simple change you're not trying to change your weight, you're not trying to gain weight or lose weight. They're not even aware of what the primary outcome of the study is. We're measuring lots of things on these folks. They're wearing loose-fitting scrubs so they can't tell if they're gaining or losing weight. And I'll describe some of the results from those studies. That was mentioned in Mathilde's presentation, where we basically bring people to the NIH Clinical Center. They live with us for a month, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and we expose them in random order to 2 very different food environments.
Now, let me just clarify. This is a previous study. He's going to build up to where the weaknesses were in this study, and then a new one that he will be presenting. We have basically results on half of the participants, but with strong trends, and how that this new study, which was partly contributed to myself, as well as Professor Barbara Rolls, when we had constructive critique over this particular study, which did not control for beverage calories, which did not control for calorie density. And then we will go and look at his new results. But notice that these people are living in highly controlled environments. I love how he even mentioned they're in loose-fitting scrubs, because some people legitimately will use a certain tight fitting clothing to make sure that they don't overeat. That's, I think, a great thing to do. But what he's trying to do in his metabolic ward studies, even though he has had some lack of understanding of some important aspects of nutrition back in 2019. I mean, he's a physicist. He's not necessarily trained in clinical nutrition, where we are contributing, as far as myself and Professor Rolls. Was that it is an extremely well-controlled environment. It is hard to deny the fact that what he's finding are literally not just associations, but causations. These are randomized, controlled, highly controlled studies. Let's go ahead and now listen to him further on the 2019 one that led to the big hullabaloo of how processed foods cause us to eat more. But we question, is it really the processing, or is it the result of the processing, and just the number of ingredients and steps that something's been through is not enough? As we said, the high number of ingredients, a lot of vitamins and minerals, but anyway, the high amount of ingredients and the number of steps of processes that a medical formula shake that has been shown in numerous randomized controlled trials to help people with markedly improved metabolic health short term, and then when used in a comprehensive lifestyle change program where people are taught more and more how to eat on their own, have great utility in metabolic health, even though they're ultra processed. So let's let him continue on this 2019 study.
And they don't have to prepare the food, they don't have to buy the food. There's no sort of economics going on in terms of having it more convenient. They're equally convenient. 3 meals a day, and in this study, a box of snacks available. And we randomized 20 men and women from a wide range of body mass indices to either experience 2 weeks of an ultra-processed diet, which is 80% or more calories from the NOVA4 group, or minimally processed diet that had no ultra-processed foods and 80% of calories from the NOVA1 group. And then after 2 weeks, they switched to the opposite diet. And we're measuring lots of things on these folks. And importantly, our genius dietitians and chefs in the NIH Clinical Center matched these diets for the presented calories, fat, carbs, sugar, sodium, fiber, and glycemic load. And so we're trying to take, at least at the global level of these dietary patterns, these nutrients of concern out of the equation in some case. And there's some discussion that we can have about how successful we were at doing that. Okay.
And obviously, part of that discussion was really the issue of not controlling for beverage calories, which are non-satiating, low satiety per calorie. You can't, for instance, compare apple juice with a whole apple. And then also the calorie concentration of foods, or so-called calorie density, keeping in mind that foods can range anywhere from 100 or even less, but let's say 100 calories per pound all the way to 4,000 calories per pound. So I've essentially taken you from, broccoli and cauliflower and Brussels sprouts all the way to clarified butter and oils on the other end. And the weight of food is a huge factor in satiety. It is not the only factor in satiety, or what they call here, fullness and satisfaction, but weight of food is a huge part of it. We eat, in fact, more reliably a weight of food per day than an amount of calories per day. Okay, so let Dr. Hall continue.
Okay, so what happened? People did as they were told. They're rating their appetite throughout this period of time. They're eating to the same degree of hunger, fullness, satisfaction, and eating capacity. But in order to achieve this, they ended up eating about 500 calories per day more on average when they're exposed to this ultra-processed dietary pattern as compared to the minimally processed dietary pattern. And as a result, they're gaining weight during the ultra-processed dietary pattern, and they're spontaneously losing weight in the minimally processed dietary pattern. And that has also correspondingly led to changes in body fat mass. So they're gaining body fat in the ultra-processed dietary pattern, losing body fat in the minimally processed dietary pattern. So we published this study in 2019, and it's gotten the most attention of any study I'll probably ever do in my life. And there's so many hypotheses about what is really driving this. Some folks have said that it's mainly about the texture of the foods. Ultra-processed foods tend to be softer, they're easier to chew and swallow. And in fact, when we measured how quickly people were eating the meals, they ended up eating the ultra-processed meals more quickly in terms of grams per minute. Other folks have suggested that there's other aspects of the diet that weren't precisely matched. So maybe the protein content of the diet was not quite right, perfectly matched, and maybe there's something called the protein leverage hypothesis that may have led to this effect. There's a variety of ideas.
Now, let me just mention here that we'll find out, and surprising to me as well, we have to be in fidelity with the evidence and particularly high quality science that protein didn't seem to be a factor so far. We know in the new study. Let's hold off on that. I don't want to bury the headline. That I don't want to necessarily bring the punchline right to the point here. The easier to chew and eating faster is not, I think, irrelevant, particularly as it correlates to something else, which is that as you more refine a food, okay, not just the number of steps that it's been through, but if refinement, which is often, but not necessarily part of processing, and also may or may not be a problem depending on what you're refining towards. For instance, a lower calorie, concentrated, thick, protein rich, vitamin, mineral supplemented protein shake versus a whatchamacallit bar. If you don't know what that is and you're out of the United States, let's just say, a Snickers bar or whatever. Actually, Snickers at least have some whole peanuts in there. And that is part of the point of what I'm talking about. As you ultra refine a food, remove the fiber, pulverize it, remove the fiber, pulverize it until it's made into a fine dust, if you will, and increase the surface area available for digestive enzymes, you absorb more calories. Now, some people have said, oh, this is, silly stuff Dr. Rifai is talking about. Sorry, but we have clear evidence that whole plant foods, such as almonds, which have been studied with really excruciating detail, including sifting through the stool of the subjects, you do not absorb about more than 20% of the calories when you're eating a whole almond versus almond butter, and certainly almond oil, where you will absorb 98 to 99% of the calories. You'll absorb about 75 to 78% of the calories when it comes to whole almonds. There's just those little pieces and chunks are not able to be accessed by digestive enzymes, and they pass through undigested. And you could look at corn. I mean, everybody's seen corn eating corn on the cob. In our poop the next day in the toilet. Sorry, this is a medical discussion, so let's just be frank about it. So when you're looking at calories on a label, it's essentially, how many calories are emanated when you burn a food with a Bunsen burner, and then how much energy is released as you burn it in a lab. Well, we are not like that. Our bodies are not Bunsen burners. We're not burning food to release energy, although that's technically correct in terms of a calorie being a unit of energy that is going to emanate from a product upon burning. Our metabolic burning involves, first of all, the ability to digest and then absorb, and then when it gets into the body, then our mitochondria will, burn it or oxidize it to turn it into energy and some heat. That part is, somewhat true, but it's not as straightforward as just burning it. So you can absolutely end up with less of calorie absorption than you see on a label, particularly as it relates to whole plant foods. And that probably applies to whole lentils, whole beans, intact whole grains, not just whole grains. I'm talking about more steel cut oats, not Cheerios, although I'd put obviously Cheerios in a less metabolically risky category than Rice Krispies or Fruit Loops. But anyway, you get the idea. Fruit Loops are, I'm sorry, Cheerios are pulverized into dust, even though they're made from whole grain. You can't really see the intact version of whatever they came from. They're then burnt into a circle. Whereas obviously with steel cut oatmeal or farro or quinoa, you can, or obviously legumes, whole lentils, whole beans, peas, you can see these whole piece nuts and seeds that are whole. You can see the intact version of these plants, and our chewing capacity, unlike a machine, cannot chew them to the point where we can absorb all their calories. Great. They still provide us volume and fullness. They pass through, absorb 80% of the calories, maybe 20% or not. That's another factor. That's the refinement, though. The processing may or may not lead to that. And therefore, we have an issue where you get to the even, a Chobani yogurt with some, they call it fruit. It's really jam or jelly at the bottom, but also being, compared to white bread in the Nova system because of the number of steps it's been through and then the number of ingredients. But the ultimate result of a Greek yogurt, even with the, teaspoon of jelly at the bottom versus, a Ritz cracker, no, they're not the same. Sorry. Anyway, let's let Dr. Hall move on.
We did a post hoc analysis, and this is kind of hypothesis generating, to try to identify aspects of the individual meals when you remove the beverages from those meals that were playing a role in mediating some of the effect. And we published.
Notice how quickly he just went over, although I do have it at 1.25 speed now. We removed the beverage calories. Well, that was a huge problem. The fact that the weight of beverage calories were included in calculating the energy, the calorie concentration, along with foods in this 2019 study was a huge problem because thin liquid beverages do not operate in the same manner as a solid food. I mean, even a soft to solid food in that range is going to be very different. Now, obviously, applesauce is not the same as a whole apple, but applesauce will definitely perform more in terms of volume satiety than apple juice, which won't get you any more full or reduce calories an hour or two later any more than if you drank the same amount of water. And therefore, so beverage calories are called empty calories. I'm not going to touch on the issue of non-calorically sweetened beverages yet, because I think there's a big misunderstanding there. But the idea here is that he not only got these findings, but he got these findings after removing beverage calories. So you can see how flawed the 2019 study was, because prior to that, he actually included beverage calories. And Dr. Rolls and I, immediately contacted them by email saying, this is a really big error, not to mention that when you're even looking at foods, you have to look at their calorie concentration or energy density, aka calorie density, but you certainly cannot include beverage calories in the weight of foods because thin liquid beverage calories are not operating in the same digestive dynamics as semi-solid to solid foods.
This study at the beginning of 2023, these two factors sort of popped out at us as being potential drivers. One of them was the non-beverage energy density, so remove the beverages from the equation, look at the foods that are on the plate, and what was the energy density of those foods. The ultra-processed foods, because they're...
Again, energy density means calorie density or calorie concentration, or really better defined in practical terms as calories per bite of food.
Drier tend to concentrate the calories. They have the same, in the diets, the same macronutrient composition, but they're drier, and so they end up increasing the calorie content per gram of food.
And that water he's talking about that's in food that lowers the calories per bite has to be in the food, right? You cannot drink water with raisins and pray they turn back into grapes. It takes about a half pound or 8 ounces of grapes to make 1 ounce of raisins. And 1 ounce of raisins is going to get you as full as 1 ounce will, and 8 ounces is going to get you as full as 8 ounces will. But you can't just drink the water separately and hope that they integrate. The water has to be intrinsic to the food, which you can get by either roots in the ground, like whole fruits that are not dried fruits, but fresh whole fruits, vegetables, and then foods you cook water into. Obviously, you cook water into lentils, beans, peas. You cook water into whole grains. You can cook water into refined grains. It still technically will lower the calorie density, meaning that you'll have less calories per bite in white pasta versus a saltine cracker. Okay, so that dryness is really important, because if you take away the water, it makes it very light. And stretch receptors in the stomach that send signals through the vagus nerve to the satiety center of the hypothalamus are going to get stimulated by weight of food and stretch of those stretch receptors. If the food is light, It's not going to notice satiety, and you're going to continue to eat until you have enough volume, and that volume is going to have a lot of calories concentrated if the food is dry and calorie concentrated, or in other words, calorie dense, or as you see in the slide here, energy dense, energy being the word for calories they're using here since we're talking to a physicist. So this, he's going to get somewhat technical here.
And that seemed to mediate about 40 or so percent of the effect. And then we had this other construct that was...
Okay, 40% of the effect of how much someone eats when it comes just to the solid food. Forget about beverage calories. That will be a whole additional issue. 40%, almost half, is related to whether it is highly processed or not. It's going to be related to the calorie concentration or energy density of food, the calories per gram of food. And you can actually look at this on a label. You can look at the calories, and right there, the serving size in parentheses, the gram weight of the food will be there. Now, if you're looking at a dry bean, lentil, or pea, or a dry grain, you'll have to triple the serving size. For instance, let's say you're cooking slow cooked oats and you're cooking 50 grams of it. That cooked weight will be 150 grams. If you're cooking 100 grams of dry beans, it's going to become 300 grams after cooking. So you do have to keep in mind that you're estimating the weight of the food in its final cooked version. Okay, that's why clearly when you're looking at a baked potato, it's one thing, it's got all the water. And then even if you just bake it without adding fat, it's going to do most of the calorie concentration by drying it out. But if you then also deep fry the potato chip, you're not only getting rid of the water, but you're replacing it with the most calorie dense food on earth, oil. You're gonna change the dynamics of satiety per calorie, baked potato versus potato chip dramatically. Then when you add salt, you're really getting into another metabolic issue. I'll just defer on that for now.
Developed by Tara Fazzino at University of Kansas, something called hyper-palatable foods. And these are foods that are high in pairs of nutrients. So foods that are high in both sugar and fat, or both salt and fat, or both carbs and salt. And that also seemed to be...
So that was confusing because he said sugar and fat, and then he said, carbs and fat, or sorry, carb, sugar, any of these combinations, sugar, salt, fat as the or salt, sugar, fat, as the title of Michael Moss's book goes, really should be refined carbs in the title, right? So it'll be salt, refined carbs, fat, but salt, sugar, fat sounds so much better because refined carbs, whether it be sugar or starch, are ultimately really the same metabolic issue. Starch is just a long molecular chain of glucose molecules, and they quickly become sugar. They don't taste sweet when you're initially eating them because the long molecular chain structure doesn't allow the receptors for sweet in our tongue to be stimulated. But even in your tongue, even in your mouth, you have some amylase enzyme that could start breaking it down if you slow down to chew, and you'll start to notice that something starchy, even a baked potato, or obviously a white cracker, white bread, will start to taste sweet if you let it take enough time to be broken down by the amylase enzyme in our saliva.
Mediate a big chunk of the effect. And so that led us to design a study that's ongoing right now, where we're now again bringing people to the NIH Clinical Center. They're spending a month with us, and we've designed now 4 test diets. And they get this in 1 week in random order, a counterbalance sequence. And again, all the diets are now better matched for macronutrients, fiber, sugar, and sodium. But we have one diet that is minimally processed, low in energy density, and low in hyperpalatable foods, similar to our first study. We have one that's ultra-processed diet, high in non-beverage energy density and high in hyperpalatable foods.
Notice how they're controlling for beverages this time, right? Thanks to intervention by people like myself and Professor Barbara Rolls pointing this out to Professor Hall. So let's get into groups 3 and 4 now. Ultra-processed, high in non-beverage, meaning food-based calorie or energy density, right? And also high in hyper-palatable foods as defined by this Fazzino. I'm sorry, I can't recall the name. Questionable as we get into the Q&A that whether or not it's really defines hyper-palatability very well, because everybody in the studies were actually quite pleasantly satisfied with their food choices. So that said, let's move on to groups 3 and 4.
Similar to the first study. We have one that's high in non-beverage energy density and low in hyperpalatable foods, and a final ultra-processed diet or reformulated diet that's low in both energy density and hyperpalatable foods.
Now, this final group is extremely important because it is ultra-processed and it's low in calorie density of foods, right? Non-beverage energy density, right? They're basically have controlled for beverage calories, fantastic, and saying these non-beverage, meaning food, energy density is low. Even though it's ultra processed, it's low in calories per bite and low in hyper-palatable foods, okay? Which is, I think, important, although we might be able to argue that um, uh, a high high in non-beverage energy density, excuse me, low in non-beverage energy density and high in hyperpalatability uh, might have been a nice group to look at, but nevertheless.
And so what I'm going to present to you now is an interim analysis. This is for the first time in public. I'll present this data that we collected over the summer, where we looked at the first half of our subjects. This is
Dun, dun,
kind of giving you an
dun.
idea of what the differences between the diets are. All three ultra-processed diets are 80% or more calories from ultra-processed foods, but they vary in terms of the percentage of energy coming from hyper-palatable foods. That's these foods that, individual foods that increase in these pairs of nutrients, and their non-beverage energy density. They differ in those factors, but they're quite well matched for a variety of other.
Now, this is calories per gram. Do note here that the American Institute for Cancer Research has previously stated that keeping calories at less than 1 calorie per gram, remember the highest is 9 calories per gram, that's pure fat like oils or clarified butter. And then you have the like 0.2, 0.25 calories per gram for your leafy green vegetables. And most fruits are only at around a half calorie per gram, 0.5. Maybe a banana is close to about 1 calorie per gram, but still that's less than the 1.25 calories per gram, below which the American Institute for Cancer Research has said in the past is a goal to prevent cancer, whereas the higher calorie density foods, whether or not they're highly processed or not, could increase the risk for calorie overload. And we know that calorie overload is the biggest issue we've ever seen in terms of reducing longevity and reducing length of years of life. Because calorie reduction, I should say, reduction of non-essential calories is the most consistent thing we've ever seen in science regarding a prolongation of life.
Nutrients of concern. So the first 18 of 36 participants, 11 males, 7 females, pretty wide range of ages, 19 to 52, wide range of adiposities, BMIs ranging from 21 to 42. So it's a big range of people that we were looking at. They did what they were asked. On all 4 diets, they're eating to the same degree of hunger, fullness, satisfaction, and eating capacity. So they're doing as they were told. And again, they're blinded to what the primary outcome is. They're blinded to their body weight measurements. They're blinded to their continuous glucose measurements. Everything is blinded. Interestingly, there was no significant difference in how pleasant they rated the meals. And that's actually something that was true from our first study as well. So despite the fact that one was very highly ultra-processed and even contained more of these so-called hyper-palatable foods, people did not rate the meals as being any more or less pleasant on average. And that was true in this case too, which is kind of good news, right? It means that you could actually change people's calorie intake, at least in the first study, without necessarily changing how much they're enjoying the food.
And we have seen this clinically over and over. If you help people prepare foods that are not only lower in calorie density and high in nutrient density, but also less processed, I have no issue with that. I don't want foods to be more processed. I just don't think that the number of ingredients and the steps in processing in and of itself defines the most important factors when it comes to healthy eating. And it's also unrealistic to expect everybody to eat just minimally processed foods. There isn't even enough fruits and vegetables in the United States to get everybody even close to 2 cups of fruits and vegetables per day. If everybody started running out and buying as much fruits and vegetables as we want everyone in the public to eat, we would have broccoli going to $25 a pound. So there's some realities we have to discuss on macroeconomics and macro farming as it relates to how we use our hundreds of millions of acres in the United States. That's beyond the scope of this discussion. But if you like these kind of discussions, you like this kind of content, by all means, like, subscribe, share this video.
Interestingly, in this study, there was no significant differences in the meal eating rate, which was quite unlike the previous study. So that piece has been factored out in some sense in this study. Now, the drum roll of what happened to the primary outcome. So here's the minimally processed low diet. That's the 0% ultra-processed diet. People were eating about 2,700 calories per day. Ultra-processed high. It's about 1,000 calories a day different. So a bigger effect size than our previous study. One of the things that is actually quite different in this study is that we removed the snacks. No one has snacks this time. There was actually no significant difference in snack intake in our first study, and it complicated some of our assessments of CGM readings because we didn't know when the people ate the snacks. So we removed the snacks this time around. When you remove the hyperpalatable foods, or reduce them, we get a, maybe a nominal small reduction of 200 calories per day. Hasn't reached statistical significance yet. Again, all preliminary data, only the first half of the study subjects at this point. And then finally, ultra-processed low-low is very close to the minimally processed diet.
Ta-da. Despite the difference in being minimally versus ultra-processed, as long as the energy density or calorie density was low, and the hyperpalatability was low. These factors that are involving combinations of high calorie density, fat and salt and starch and fat and pizza immediately comes to mind when I think of the latter. You get the same results. The bottom line is Dr. Hall here is now really proven. And even though this is half of the study, we will see the same with the other half of the participants. It's not the processing that makes the difference. Just look at the equality between these two groups when it comes to minimally processed but versus ultra processed, but they're matched for energy density and hyperpalatability. It's not the processing, it is the refinement, and then the terms of refinement, the addition of hyperpalatability to calorie concentration and calorie density. So I'm going to stop there for now. Maybe we'll give them another 2 minutes. I have another call to start. So let's continue to listen for a little bit, maybe for another 2 minutes at most.
Suggesting that if you can reduce both the energy density of the overall dietary pattern and the percentage of calories coming from hyperpalatable foods, you can almost normalize people's ad libitum energy intake, despite the fact that they're still eating a diet that is more than 80% of calories from ultra-processed foods.
I'm not saying eat a bunch of ultra-processed foods. I'm saying what you do with the processing matters. Correlation, not causation. Hats off to the people in Brazil who came up with the NOVA scoring system for trying, but ignoring nutrition and just looking at steps of processing and length of ingredients lists is not precise science. And we suspected it. Many of us for years, we asked Dr. Hall to please control better for it. He has done so. And now you see this preliminary evidence that is quite impressive. And we will see probably the same exact thing when this study is completed. There you go. That's where reality meets science. If you like this kind of content, again, please feel free to like, share, subscribe. I have over 20,000 hours of clinical experience building and leading multidisciplinary care programs in metabolic health with dietitians, psychologists, exercise physiologists. I myself have my own challenges with binge eating disorder. So it's not just a professional, it's a very personal endeavor that I am involved in here. So I hope that this content helps, even though I might not have all of the fancy production value of other influencers on YouTube and the internet. I hope that what you're finding here is really helpful and actionable to you in your real life and what we call finding where reality meets science. We think the Flex 5 lifestyle is the best for most when it comes down to ethic agnostic, practical, sustainable longevity lifestyle that doesn't have any absolute restrictions. And if you're interested in learning more about the Flex 5 lifestyle, please just go to myflex5.com. That's MYFLEX number 5.com. So those seven characters together, MYFLEX, then the number 5, myflex5.com, and you'll have an opportunity to search for coaching opportunities if you're someone that has more financial capacity, and then certainly click on masterclass and you can learn more about options to just take the masterclass or even do a momentum session, 90 minutes on Zoom with me, where we can really tweak and optimize and kickstart your journey towards long health and well-being. Okay, take care.